I've achieved none of the goals I set out to do, and sometimes I feel disappointed by that. But seeing my daughter pursue her art fills me with more pride than I ever would have felt achieving that dream for myself.
Hi, Christian, and congratulations on winning this month's 11 Second Club. This is a really nice piece, and before we jump into anything, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So my name's Arran Baker. I am a cinematic animator at Moon Studios. Previously worked on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse at Sony Pictures Imageworks and a couple of other films and TV stuff. This is working really, really well. The things that I would like about this piece in particular is how you're playing with rhythm and also how appealing your poses are. So if we just dive more into the concept for one moment, I would like to kind of break down a little bit as to what's happening in the scene. So I've just done a quick Word document here, just kind of explaining what's actually happening and trying to find the context and the subtext in our scene, because there are a couple of things in here which I think we can make a little clearer. So first of all, we're just establishing whether they are talking to somebody else or if he's more to himself. It does sound like the way he keeps on darting, like the way he kind of articulates some of his sounds towards a screenwriter frame, it does feel like he's talking to somebody else. But the actual lines he says, I think he's quite internal. Even though he is talking to somebody, he's kind of backtracking through his life. And so I'd like to see a little bit more of that inner thought process, even if he is typing. So when he says, so what I would usually do here is break down the lines and then break down their subtext. Now, the thing that's quite interesting with this piece in particular is he's saying his inner monologue out loud. So as he's typing, usually we try and find what the character is feeling. And a lot of what he's saying here is he's confessing. So really, the subtext is already out loud. So it kind of makes your acting a little bit, it can be sometimes a little bit too on the nose. And so we have to dive even deeper. So when he says something along the lines of, I've achieved none of my goals that I set out to do, he's already come to terms with this. And the way he says it, it sounds like he's like, it's been hard for him in the past, but the way he says it, it sounds quite neutral. And then he says, and sometimes I feel disappointed by that. So he does feel regret, but he has come to terms with it. So I feel like that moment there is a good opportunity to maybe get a little bit more internal, where he kind of thinks he's thinking in his head as he says it, like he's looking back on his life and thinking through the steps that he took. And it could just be a subtle dart away from his typewriter. And then he says, but seeing my daughter pursue her art. So he's proud that she's taken her own steps. Like, this is the kind of subtext here. She's not following in his footsteps, which means that he's kind of proud of her because she's gone out and she's gone out and pursued the goals that she wanted to do. And the articulation on her art, I think that you have hit, but we can dive a little deeper into that as to how you execute it. And then he says, fills me with more pride than I ever could have felt having achieved that dream myself. So he's found a better incentive in life by seeing it, like he's more fulfilled through life through actually seeing his daughter pursue that rather than himself. So at that point it's very uplifting, and you have definitely executed that. It's kind of like he's very content with his life, which I do think you've hit quite well. So I just want to go through a couple of beats there and just kind of break down how we maybe could have pushed the performance itself rather than just focusing on execution alone. So if I just go through this.
I've achieved none of the goals I set out to do, and sometimes I feel disappointed by that.
So when he says, I feel disappointed by that, I do like that there is a change in his emotion, but I don't feel like we go deep enough, personally.
I've achieved none of the goals I set out to do.
Also, just like the way he says none of the...
I've achieved none of the goals.
I feel like there's a missed opportunity there where he's like, I've achieved none of the goals. Like, even if it's just a subtle accent, maybe with his head, or maybe there's like an accent with his eyes or his brows that he does. where he's just like, I've achieved none of the goals. I feel like the none, it needs a little bit of articulation in the head. It just feels like there's a missed opportunity there. It can be subtle, but we need some form of like connection between how he articulates his sounds and how he performs.
I've achieved none of the goals I set out to do, and sometimes I feel disappointed by that.
And when he's like, it feels like there's not too much of a change here.
Goals I set out
from here, where he's quite neutral.
Set out to do, and some.
I just put a line here, a line here. This change doesn't feel too deep. Like, it doesn't feel deep enough to me. When he says,
and sometimes I feel
so when he said sometimes I know that he does have like the typing sound in the audio, but I feel like we could maybe just ignore that for a moment and just make him a little, so maybe he just like darts over to his left. And like the actual mouth shapes that he makes, like the emotional mouth shape, maybe could be a little lower. I'd just like to see a beat in there where he kind of looks slightly more internal, where he's just like, if he's typing here, he's like, and sometimes I feel disappointed by that. He kind of looks away from what he's doing, still enough that we can read the pose, but I like the actual, like, some of the brow shapes that you're getting in here. Maybe we could be still slightly lower. And I think there could just be this moment where maybe he, like, just to break things up, if he did just have his hands kind of resting for a moment on top of the typewriter. The way he says it, he does feel like he's come to terms with it, but I feel like there should be a moment there where he's like, and sometimes I feel disappointed by that. Maybe he doesn't have to go too sad with the mouth thinking about it, but there should be this moment, I feel like, where he's internalizing and maybe he looks slightly lower, maybe even lower than this. Maybe if he's down here.
I've achieved none of the goals I set out to do. I've achieved none.
So when he says none, maybe there could just be a little accent in here. You can see there, this little accent. Obviously, the shapes aren't going to be as clean as you'd probably pose them if you were to doing it in the 3D, but you get the idea. So we're just slightly accenting out on the none. It could be smaller than this, but just having a little bit of texture in there, I think, would really help.
Sometimes I out to do, and some.
I do like this beat where you're trying to break up the rhythm by having this little accents where you press on the glasses, and I think that's a really nice observation because we do that a lot when we wear glasses. But I would say just for this specific moment,
set out to do. And
I'm not sure if it feels like he would have the incentive to do that. He's very internal in his mind right now. As he's typing, he's thinking about his life. And I don't know if you would consciously press your glasses up. I feel like you'd be so in your internal thoughts here.
Sometimes I feel disappointed by that.
I do like that there is this kind of like somber moment in here. I just don't feel like he would address that to the person he's talking to. I like that there is a little delay on the eyes, so we're not leading with the eyes. We kind of lead with the head slightly. So he's still kind of addressing the person. He's still kind of fixated on the person he's looking at before he goes back to typing. And then I think there could be like this more anticipated build-up of him feeling a bit more fulfilled. So he's going into a happier state.
Disappointed by that.
It feels like in here we are smiling before, but I don't quite feel the like fulfillment that he's having. So having this, like, he's like, okay, let's like, but there's better things in life right now. I think we could just make it a little earlier.
But
so we really clearly read in here where he has this like big inhale where he's like, but then things are better now. I think the execution we have for her art, maybe we could like it feels quite animation-y to me right now, the way we accent where
daughter pursue her,
it feels
pursue her, pursue her,
it feels a little early.
pursue her.
I think when he says her art, he's like, this is something else. Like this, she's taking a different path. I feel like we can maybe accent a little bit more genuine and a little bit more like sincere in the way he would say it. So when he's like her art, I feel like he could be like right now, this having this accent with the chest coming up and everything kind of rising. It feels a little stiff and a little like unobserved in the way that maybe someone might move, because I don't think we naturally would move like that. It feels like quite an animation thing to do. So if it were me, I would probably have gone for something a little bit more sincere, where if he's like, but see my daughter pursue her art, like her art, like we would just have a little accent with the head or something. Where he's like, but her art, like she's doing something else to me, is like the subtext. Just the way he says her art, he could like slightly gesture up and to the left slightly. So he's like her art. I think he can still like be fixated on looking at the typewriter, but like he just little accents with the eyes and the brows. Just says like her art.
Daughter pursue her art fills me with more.
I think this one feels a little better because he like fills me with more pride, so he's really uplifting now. And this one, I feel like just the accent of more. He's like more, like he kind of like his stance and his posture rises, and I think that really helps sell the moment.
With more,
and the little accents
with more.
In here, I think feels really good. I think we might even be able to just slightly lift the brow even higher. Just a little bit more, maybe even get a little bit more white to the eye just to show how much he's uplifted by it. And then when he says ever would have felt, I feel like he's very passionate right now. So I think we can get maybe a little bit more of like like some subtle accents in there where he's like really like he feels very passionately about what he's saying.
Pride than I ever would have.
He's like ever would have felt. Like he's very confident in his mindset. So more pride than I ever would have felt. So it's like a little texture in there. He's like ever.
With more pride than I
ever. Like a very subtle, like maybe it's just like a little shake in there. Where he's like ever. Then maybe he could slightly tilt this way, and then he'd just slightly overshoot the other way, and then he'd return back into the more neutral.
With more pride than I ever would have felt.
I've exaggerated it again, but just a little like ever. Like a little anticipation to the left, and then accent like overshoots into the ever, and then settle back into the middle.
Ever would have than I ever would have felt achieving that dream. And
again, when he says that dream, and I think we're just doing that same, we're doing a very repetitive, like lift up, lift up, lift up more, lift up more. And I feel like we could just make that a little bit more, like we could have a bit more variety in there.
Would have felt achieving that dream for myself.
Like that dream is kind of a bittersweet thing for him, because the dream that he never got is something his daughter had. So when he's like that dream, he's like this one thing. So I think when he says that dream, I think maybe we can go from
Ever would have felt that than I ever would have felt achieving that.
So if we started here, when he says that dream, I feel like maybe he could go in that dream, and then we can really squint the eyes. And it's okay if we don't see too much of the pupils at this point. And then the brows will come slightly in. This is a pretty close representation of what I'm trying to say here. So as we go through here, instead of going that dream and lifting up, we kind of go in and we slightly squint. So we'd get slightly... We can raise those cheeks so he goes, that dream kind of thing.
Would have felt achieving that
dream for myself. I think for myself, that's when he can come back up. Like, he's very, like, concluded in his thought at this point. So in here, I feel like he goes, that dream for myself. And so he comes into this, like, resolution when he gets to this point here. So by this point, he's thinking to himself, I'm in a better place now. And then
Myself.
I do like this. I do like this lean in.
Myself.
I do like the variety in it. And I think it is a nice contrast to have in there.
Living that dream for myself.
He's very content at this point. I do like the smirk and the lifting of the eyes that you have in here. So I do feel like we can work with this. So now that we've got like the main, this is literally just discussing performance. But I feel like from here we can now begin to discuss a little bit more about your execution. So first of all, what I'll do is I'll go through poses, and then from there we can break it down into your spacing and the mechanics, and then some of the like polish in the face and that kind of thing. So first of all, with this very first pose, I do like it. I think it works really nicely. I like how we are framing everything out toward screen right. I think that works really nicely. I do feel like what we can do in here is we can actually lower this shoulder. I know that what you're doing is you're trying to like lean everything out this way, but I feel like that shoulder, for how high the arms are, our shoulders connects that way. So depending on how high our arms are, depends on how raised our shoulders would be. And to me, when I look at this pose, it feels like he's leaning in too much. So if I was doing this to you, instead of we could be slightly leaning in, but right now it feels like we're doing this, like we're really leaning in, but our hands are upright. So it feels like we're slightly leaning in, like into screen right too much. And it's mostly just to do with that shoulder line. So if we just lower through here, then I think that'll just make the arm itself just feel a little bit more relaxed. And then I do like that we have the hands. You're not afraid to cover silhouettes too much. Maybe what we could do is have this finger slightly higher, somewhere in here, just so that we do break enough of the silhouette to see that we're not doing any tangents with the shirt, but then we also have a clear enough silhouette for the hand so that they don't overlap each other, just so that we get that clarity in there for the audience. Also, just in terms of hand poses, I feel like I do like that you have this thing where as he's typing, there's kind of like a slight raise on the pinky as well as the index finger. But I think these lines conflict too much for me. So what I would try to do is try and simplify them. So if we have this one on the middle finger, I would try to repeat a similar line for the middle. They kind of group together more. And then you have that raise on the pinky where it's a slightly different angle. So essentially, instead of doing, just looking at the angles, kind of looks like we have this. What I would try to do is make those more parallel together and then have that one that's slightly higher. So we have like, we're simplifying the shapes a little bit more. So that two are like slightly more parallel. I think when we get to leading the actions, I feel like when we press buttons, if we were to lead before we press, so as we come down, if we begin to lead with the finger so that when we make the contacts, there's then a compression afterwards. I think that'd be really nice. So in here, I'd have been inclined to try and make it so that we lead earlier with that finger, so that we already kind of almost make contact if possible, and then you'd feel the bend afterwards. So now we get to here, which is a new pose. Again, just trying to clean up this line. It is an interesting one based on where the base of the head is relative to Malcolm. But it feels like our base of our head should be roughly around here. And it feels like right now it's down under his jaw. So what I would try to do is create a line that kind of sits nicely through so that it feels like the neck is a little bit more under the base of where the head is. So I'm sure you can move those neck controls just so that it's a little higher. It feels like it kind of kinks up. And I know that's just something that maybe we can't tweak too much, but it'd be nice to try to clean that up if possible.
I feel disappointment.
Same here. It feels like the shoulder, I don't know if it's just the lighting, but it feels like the shoulders are really raised here. And I don't feel like we need to. What I would try to do is if you want to make it a little higher through that section, you can. But I feel like it's maybe a bit too raised. I think it's probably just because of the negative space, because we do have this waistcoat here, and it doesn't help create that silhouette that I'm looking at. But I'm just looking at the blue, and it would be nice to see that flow a bit further down. And then we have this pose here, which I think is working nicely. Just looking at where the arms are connected. It does feel like maybe the arm here would stay stacked over the top. But it'd be nice to see this arm go over the top. I don't know, it feels a bit strange that it goes behind the body here. It's just that twist. It looks as though the upper arm is going through the side of the torso, whereas really I think it would stay in front. I think in here we might even be able to tilt the head slightly more, just to lean in, and that'll hopefully make the audience sympathize a little bit more with the character. But I think it's really appealing. Like, all your facial expressions work really nicely. There are little things of connection, so like
for myself.
I think this pose in particular is really appealing. I think just the eye shapes that you've managed to hit work really well, and some of the mouth shapes are really really nice as well too. I think maybe there's something related to the way the upper lids are kind of isolated right now, lower lid, sorry. So as they come up here, it'd be nice to see a little bit more of the like cheek raise a little bit more, so we see a little bit more of this, because really we can't actually compress, we can't lift our lower lids unless we squint and our cheeks raise up. It'd be nice to maybe get a little bit of an arc in the hand. And I'm just looking at the wrist here. So just through here, if this was slightly wider, then that would move into the arc a little bit more. Something like this, just a little bit of refinement through there. And then as we press, it'd be nice to then feel a little bit of that pivot happen on the finger, so which would feel really nice going through there. It feels a bit strange to me. There's a little bit of cleanup that needs to be done on the wrist as well as it comes down here. So as it comes down, I'm seeing the spacing on the wrist, and then it kind of stops in here as you turn. And then it kind of isolated, kind of moves diagonally this way. So essentially, as we go like this, it comes around and then goes into the tap. Or even if not, if you just want to, it just needs a little bit more of an arc as it wraps around with the wrist there. I think it'd be nice to get a few more little eye darts in there. His eyes are looking for where he's about to type. Would be really nice. I've probably gone too far with that dart there in particular, but I think it'd be nice to get a little bit more of a connection there. And then just even like as the eyes darts, then you get a slight amount of little connection on the rotation Y in the head as well, so that as he looks left to right, there's little accents, just little follow throughs on the head to connect with that eye line. And then really the only main things that I think we need to focus on really is lip sync, since that's a big one for this piece. When we do lip sync, we always try and make the articulation happen on the sound, and right now it feels like a lot of your lip sync happens too early. So I don't know if that's just a compression with the upload, but I'll assume it's not. So ideally, when we do lip sync, we need to articulate on the sound, not before. So if we anticipate sounds like B's and M's, we do go a little bit before and we hold it for a little longer so that when we articulate, the open happens on the sound. But generally in here, what I'm looking through, I do like that we open the mouth a little earlier, so we're anticipating that we're about to speak. But it happens, the actual articulation that you're animating here feels like it's too early. So if anything, if we had this shape here, which I think works nicely, and then an I've here, that's where you would hear the I've. And then the lip would begin to already lead here, even if you had the jaw stay open. And then that's when you get the V shape. I've achieved. So usually what we try to do is we try and hit those main shapes. So like we got for achieve. So I still don't feel the achieved. We need to go slightly wider on the corners. Achieved. This is where the V kind of tucks in. The D sound comes from our tongue. And then none. So we got the chi. This is the V D sound. And then none is where we need to open. The tongue would be lower here. None of. So again, you've got that V shape. And then there's like the L. Goals. This is the S shape. So usually when we do lip sync, we try to find our extreme widths and our extreme sounds. So on to do, he says to, so we go into oo. So it essentially goes from, if we forget about the T, because that's from the tongue, so it's to do. We forget the T and the D, so it's just to, oo, oo. So we're essentially going from a jawline. And on oo, we need to go slightly more open. It may be a little too wide. I think it's appealing, the shape you have. But I would be inclined just to make it a little smaller based on the delivery that he says. It feels like a lot of your lip sync, it feels like it pops into shapes, and I think we can make that a little bit more natural so it has these flowing arcs and the spacing isn't as snappy. It's quite hard to do lip sync when it's so early. It's hard to see where it should hit, like based on like to draw over your shapes. And keep the jaw going open here, but the lip, the upper lip can begin to come down with it. That we get the sum. So the lip sync feels a little closer here, timing wise. It feels a little bit more to the sound, but it's still too early. I think there is a lot of like the corners going in and out here, and generally when we try and find extremes, and they blend towards each one. So when he says daughter pursue, when he says seeing, so you got seeing, so that's the wide, seeing my daughter. So it kind of goes wide and then slightly comes in, seeing my daughter. And I said pursue her. So that whole point, we can keep it going in. In here, we can keep the corners in. Because right now they're going too backwards and forwards. So the T comes out wider. pursue her art. Pursue her art. So you just go her art. So more pride. More pride. So you can just hold for more pride, for more up to more pride. More pride. You see how the corners go in and then they slowly come back out again. For my... So in here, for the M, we can keep it smaller. And that's when you go wider. Otherwise, I think it's looking really good, Christian. So yeah, congratulations, and hope this has given you some insight as to how you could make this better. Cheers.